So, usually when you look at a major economic shock in an industry, say like a sudden tariff or a huge cut to a government support program, the expectation is pretty much guaranteed devastation.
Right. I mean, the logic feels a lot like gravity. The math just goes negative.
Exactly. You pull a massive financial safety net away from, the most geographically isolated businesses in a sector, and those specific businesses should just wither and die.
Yeah. You anticipate a localized depression, the
Right.
weakest players quit, and the whole region just produces less. That's the textbook outcome.
It's supposed to be clean and totally predictable.
Mm.
But we are jumping into a deep dive today that completely shatters that logic.
It really does. It's a massive face slap to everything you think you know about markets.
Yeah, we're unpacking a historical puzzle today that is profoundly counterintuitive. So in 1995, the Canadian government just completely eliminated a $700 million a year financial subsidy for prairie farmers.
Just wiped it out overnight.
Right. And the farms at the absolute edge of the map, the ones furthest from any port, they took a staggering financial hit.
Which, conventional wisdom says those farms are dead on arrival.
Yeah.
I mean, they were bleeding cash just to move their product.
Exactly. The geography alone should have bankrupted them. But they didn't die.
No, they didn't.
Instead, those exact remote firms mutated into, like, the most hyper-efficient, high-tech agricultural powerhouses on the continent.
It's crazy.
So the mission of this deep dive is to figure out how. How did a crushing logistical penalty spark an aggressive high-tech revolution?
Yeah.
And who actually survived to see the other side of it?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, we are looking at a highly detailed working paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Yeah, authored by Mark Brown, Sean Ferguson, and Krina Viju.
Right. And what makes this research so mind-blowing isn't just the theory. It's the sheer massive scale of the microdata.
Oh, the data set is incredible.
I mean, they utilized a unique census panel from Statistics Canada. They tracked roughly 30,000 individual grain farms across the Canadian prairies.
30,000 individual farms. That's not a sample. That's practically everyone.
Exactly. And they tracked their actual real-world financial and operational decisions over a 20-year period, from 1991 to 2011.
So for you listening, we are basically looking at a real-time, documentary-style observation of the invisible hand of the market, literally playing out in the dirt.
No academic jargon today.
Hmm.
Just a brutal story of survival, technological mutation, and, honestly, market cannibalization.
Because if you are dealing with supply chains right now, the underlying rules here are terrifyingly relevant. Usually, when shipping costs go up, people ship less.
Right, you scale back.
But today, we're going to see how making it wildly expensive to ship crops actually forced farmers to export more valuable things, invent entirely new ways to treat the dirt, and eventually just swallow their neighbors whole.
It's a relentless chain reaction. But to understand the cascade, we have to look at the bomb that went off in 1995.
Right, the death of a 100-year-old subsidy.
Yeah, this wasn't some minor policy tweak. We're talking about the sudden execution of a country-defining economic framework.
Okay, let's build that context. Imagine a massive structural policy that ran since 1897.
The crow rate.
Exactly, the crow rate. This was an ancient subsidy that basically made it incredibly cheap for prairie farmers to ship heavy grain by rail to the ocean ports.
Because, I mean, if you go back to the late 19th century, Canada desperately needed to settle the western prairies.
Right, geopolitical survival.
Exactly. They needed population out there.
Yeah.
But it's thousands of miles from the ocean. So to incentivize people to farm out there, the government subsidized the train tickets for the grain.
It created this artificial reality where shipping heavy wheat was practically free. You had generations of families whose entire reality was built on this one rule.
And then the government just pulls the plug.
But why? Why kill a 100-year-old sacred cow?
Well, it was a brutal squeeze. In the early 90s, Canada had massive federal budget deficits.
Right, so a $700 million line item looks pretty juicy to cut.
Exactly. But the real kill shot came from outside. The international community, through the gas-tea negotiations, which later became the WTO, they looked at the crow rate and said, absolutely not.
They called it an unfair export subsidy.
Right. They argued Canada was artificially dumping cheap grain on the world market. So, under immense international pressure, the subsidy dies.
Okay, so the subsidy vanishes, and train freight rates for these farmers instantly triple. But I really want to look at the raw math here, because this is where the shock feels like disconnected from the dollar amount.
Yeah, the math is fascinating.
The freight rates tripled, but in raw dollars, the increase was only about 17 to 34 Canadian dollars per ton.
Which, sounds like an annoyance, not an apocalypse.
That's exactly my thought. You hear a $30 hike, you assume the business just raises its prices. But the data shows this specific, tiny fee jump destroyed up to 17% of the wheat's total value at the farm gate.
It's a staggering evaporation of wealth.
I mean, how does a $30 train ticket wipe out a fifth of your revenue?
Well, this is the first big face-slapping moment. You cannot apply normal retail logic here.
Okay, explain that.
A farmer couldn't just pass the cost to the consumer because all the wheat was marketed by a monopoly, the Canadian Wheat Board.
Ah, right, the wheat board.
Yeah, and they used a really rigid price pooling mechanism. They sell the aggregate wheat on the global market at the absolute global price.
And a buyer in Europe doesn't care what a Canadian train ticket costs.
Exactly. They pay the world price. So the board takes that world price, and then they retroactively deduct the specific cost of the train ticket from the individual farmer's paycheck.
Oh, wow. So the farmer absorbs every single penny of the logistic shock.
Every single penny. If the global price is $200 and your subsidized freight was $10, you take home $190.
But if your freight suddenly spikes to $40,
you take home $160. Your top-line revenue just cratered, and you have zero power to change the price of your product.
which introduces this brutal geographic hierarchy because the logistics cost is strictly based on your distance to the port.
Geography became destiny overnight.
The paper has this map of the prairies, and it's basically a heat map of unavoidable pain. If you lived in northeast Saskatchewan, which is the absolute furthest point from any ocean,
Your farm was just bleeding out from day one.
right, your ability to survive had nothing to do with your work ethic or your yield. It was entirely dictated by the GPS coordinates your grandfather picked 100 years ago.
The subsidy masked reality for a century.
Yeah.
Once it was gone, distance was a death sentence for low-margin crops.
So put yourself in that farmer's boots. You're hemorrhaging cash. You can't change the global price of wheat. You obviously can't move your 2,000 acres closer to Vancouver.
You have to perform an economic magic trick,
Yes. You have to pivot to a luxury good.
which leads to the massive counterintuitive crop flip.
This is so wild. If shipping costs explode, common sense says you stop exporting. Maybe you grow feed for local cows.
Right, keep it local.
But the data shows the exact opposite. High-value crop exports from these completely landlocked farms absolutely skyrocketed. Wheat farming plunged 13 percentage points in the hardest-hit zones.
And the farming of canola, a high-value oilseed, it spiked massively.
Why? What is the actual mechanism driving that?
It's an underlying logic called the Alkean-Allen effect.
Let's avoid the academic jargon. Let's use an analogy.
Okay, go for it.
I like to think of this like an airline luggage fee. Let's say you're flying, and suddenly the airline says they are charging a flat $100 fee for any carry-on bag, regardless of what's inside.
Because the bag takes up the same space in the overhead bin either way.
Exactly. Now, you are not going to use that expensive bag to pack cheap flip-flops and like $10 t-shirts.
No, it wouldn't be worth the fee.
Right. You're only going to pack your designer suits and expensive gear to make the flat fee worth it. Wheat was the flip-flops. Canola was the designer suit.
That is a perfect translation. Wheat has a super low value-to-weight ratio. It's cheap and heavy. Canola yields premium cooking oil. It's lighter and way more expensive.
So the farmers were backed into a corner. To justify this brutal new train ticket, they had to squeeze more actual monetary value out of every single rail car.
Shipping cheap wheat meant forfeiting nearly 20% of its value to the train company. Shipping canola meant the freight charge consumed a way, way smaller percentage of the total value.
It wasn't a trend, it was purely mathematical survival.
But just changing the seeds in your planter wasn't enough to survive.
Right, because the overarching subsidy money was still gone.
Yeah, their absolute revenue was still down, so they needed to squeeze more out of the land itself.
Which meant breaking a golden, centuries-old rule of farming. They had to stop letting the earth rest.
The death of summer fallow.
Yeah, let's explain what summer fallow actually is for anyone outside the industry.
Basically, it's the practice of leaving a field completely empty and unplanted for a whole year. You just plow the dirt occasionally to kill weeds.
To an outsider, leaving your factory floor idle for a year sounds like terrible business.
Well, in a wet climate, it would be. But the Canadian prairies are semi-arid. It's dry. By leaving the field bare, You let a full year of rain and snowmelt soak in and get banked in the soil.
You're stockpiling 2 years of water for one crop.
Exactly. It was a mandatory survival tactic in that climate.
But looking at the post-1995 data, the use of summer fallow just drops off a cliff, down 13 percentage points in the high freight zones.
The farmers just look at the math and realize they couldn't afford the luxury of idle land anymore.
The financial shock forced them to put the land into continuous, brutal, year-over-year production.
But that creates an immediate ecological paradox.
Right, because if you farm continuously in a semi-arid desert and stop banking the moisture,
The soil should turn to powder. It should have been a massive dust bowl.
but the prairies didn't turn to dust.
No, they didn't.
And that's because, to survive, they triggered a massive technological revolution. They had to adopt this sci-fi-sounding technique called zero-tillage.
And in 1991, almost no one was doing this. It was super niche.
What exactly is zero-tillage? Contrast it with regular farming.
While traditional farming uses heavy steel plows, you drag them through the dirt to turn it over and make a soft bed for the feeds.
But that exposes all the wet soil to the sun.
Exactly. The moisture just evaporates. Zero-tillage abandons the plow entirely.
So how do you get the seed in the ground?
You use incredibly massive, heavily engineered machines. A zero-till drill uses these specialized discs to slice a tiny, precise slit right into the hard, unplowed earth.
Wow.
Then it pneumatically shoots the seed and the exact required dose of fertilizer straight into that slit, and mechanical packers immediately seal it closed behind it, all in one pass.
So you leave all the dead plant matter from last year sitting right on top of the soil.
Right, the stubble stays intact. It acts like a physical shield against the sun and the wind. It perfectly traps whatever tiny bit of moisture is in the ground.
The data on this is insane. Zero-till went from an 8% adoption rate in 91 to a staggering 59% by 2011.
It completely rewrote how humans interact with the soil across half a continent in just 20 years.
And the causal chain here is what's so mind-blowing. Let's trace it back.
Okay, let's do it.
A government kills a transport subsidy. That makes heavyweight unprofitable, which forces desperate farmers to grow canola. To afford the canola inputs, they have to abandon resting the soil. And to abandon resting the soil without causing a dust bowl, they're forced into mass adoption of a moisture-locking super machine.
You literally are watching a macro-logistics policy alter the physical and chemical composition of the dirt.
It's incredible. And if we pause the story right here, it sounds like this beautiful triumph of the human spirit. The family farmer faced an impossible shock, adapted, bought new tech, and survived.
Yeah, that's exactly what everyone thought for the first 10 years.
Yeah, but the 20-year data shows something way darker.
Oh, it is a ruthless reality.
We have to ask, who actually drove this change? Was it the plucky individual farmer, or was it a bloodbath?
To figure that out, the researchers used a statistical tool called the FHK decomposition method.
Okay, break that down simply.
Basically, it takes a massive change like this huge jump in high-tech farming and slices it up to see who actually did it.
Right.
Is the prairie upgrading because existing, regular farmers are learning new tricks? They call that the within-farm effect. Yeah. Or self-improvement.
Okay, so a guy goes to the bank, gets a loan, and buys a zero-till drill.
Exactly. But the other side of the equation is what they call reallocation.
Which is an incredibly polite economic term.
Very polite. Reallocation measures market share shifting. It measures the birth of massive new megafarms and the death of existing ones.
So it's basically asking, did the slow farmers just die and get their land eaten by the fast, rich farmers next door?
It's the Darwinian churn of the market. And the data tells a crazy tale of 2 decades.
Let's look at the first decade, 1991 to 2001.
During that window, the data shows the self-improvement effect totally dominated.
Right. The researchers note a huge 29-point increase in zero-till tech in the hardest-hit areas.
Yeah.
And 16 of those points were just regular farmers adapting.
If you stopped the study in 2001, you'd think the small family farm won.
But that was a 10-year illusion.
A total mirage.
Because when you look at the 20-year horizon, from 91 to 2011, that self-improvement metric just stalls out entirely.
It completely flattens.
Suddenly, over half of the entire technological and land use shift is explained by reallocation.
By cannibalization.
Yeah, it's the boiling frog analogy.
Yeah.
A massive cohort of farmers survived the initial 1995 shock. They treaded water for 10 years, maybe took on massive debt to pivot to canola.
But they couldn't keep up with the compounding math.
Right, and they were just quietly, ruthlessly wiped off the map. Their land was absorbed by massive corporate or mega family operations.
It's a slow-motion extinction event for the small guy.
But wait, mechanically, why? If everyone knew zero-till was the secret to survival, why didn't the small struggling farm just buy the equipment in year 12?
Well, the weapon that killed them was the technology itself.
Explain that.
You have to look at the capital requirements. We talked about those massive zero-till drills. They are astronomically expensive.
We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. A small farmer may be working 500 acres. They simply do not have the production volume to justify that investment.
Even growing premium canola, the math doesn't work.
No, you can't amortize a $500,000 machine over 500 acres. The per acre cost just destroys you.
Oh, I see. The fixed cost is just way too high.
Exactly. Only the large farms could mathematically rationalize buying the gear because they could spread that fixed cost across thousands of acres.
Wow. So the adoption of this eco-friendly, moisture-saving technology was fundamentally tied to farm expansion.
It was a prerequisite for consolidation.
It wasn't just a tractor. It was a weapon of mass consolidation. You couldn't afford the tech unless you had massive scale, and if you bought the tech, you needed more land to make the payment.
So the big guys became predatory buyers.
Hunting for their neighbor's acreage. Which brings us to arguably the most face-slapping irony in the whole paper.
The government bailout.
Yes, the
Yeah.
bailout. Because the Canadian government knew pulling the subsidy would hurt. They weren't blind to it.
Right, so they tried to build a financial pillow to catch the little guy.
A massive pillow. They handed out $1.9 billion in relief money.
$1.6 billion in direct compensation and another $300 million for the hardest hit areas.
Which was basically 2 years' worth of the old subsidy. It was supposed to protect the small farms and help them transition.
But the micro data implies that exact money became the financial ammunition used to destroy them.
Let's trace that cash flow, because it is brilliant and brutal. Say I'm a small 500-acre farmer. The government cuts me a transition check based on my land. Let's call it $30,000.
Okay, that's a nice little infusion.
Sure, it pays down some debt, it buys me one more season, but 30 grand does not buy a $500,000 zero-till rig.
No, it doesn't solve your structural deficit at all.
It's basically a severance package. It subsidized my slow decline until I eventually quit. But what happens when the massive 5,000-acre mega farm gets their check?
Well, their check is tied to their massive acreage. So they get a huge influx of liquid capital, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And they don't just use it to keep the lights on?
No, they deploy it as strategic capital. They use that giant government check as the down payment on the new high-tech zero-till fleets.
Which drops their operating costs, makes them hyper-efficient, and gives them the leverage to go to the bank for a massive loan.
Exactly. And what do they buy with that loan?
They buy the land of the small farmer who is currently surviving on his $30,000 severance package.
The government literally funded the consolidation they were trying to prevent. The big guys used the financial pillow to smother the little guys.
It is a perfect demonstration of how capital behaves. It always flows toward efficiency and scale.
Even when the state tries to stop it.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for the skeptics listening. This is an incredible story, but how do we know for an absolute fact that the train tickets caused this?
Oh, the researchers proved it.
Because the 90s were chaotic. Global warming, new fertilizers, GMOs. How is it not a coincidence?
That's why this MBER paper is so bulletproof. They didn't just guess. They ran intense regression models across 464 different census districts.
And what did they control for?
Literally everything. They mathematically froze the background noise. They controlled for the exact January temperatures, the exact July temperatures, historical rainfall.
Wait, they even controlled for the specific type of dirt, didn't they?
Yes. 5 different soil zones. From the arid brown dirt in the south to the rich black soil in the north.
They neutralized the fact that canola naturally grows better in black dirt.
Exactly. They locked down the weather and the geology.
And once they stripped all of that away, the data handed down a mathematically ironclad verdict.
The train ticket was the singular smoking gun.
The exact numbers are crazy. For every single $1 increase in a district's freight cost, the internal adoption of canola went up exactly 0.52 percentage points.
And wheat plummeted 0.69 points.
It wasn't random climate change. The precise dollar amount of the penalty mathematically dictated the physical mutation of the land.
And this introduces this huge elite economic theory to the mud of Saskatchewan, the Malitz model.
Right. I want to dig into that. What is the Malitz theory normally used for?
So Mark Malitz wrote this famous paper in 2003. It's a cornerstone of macroeconomic trade theory. Usually it's used to explain massive global manufacturing.
Like automakers and semiconductor companies.
Right. The theory says that when a market gets hit with a trade shock, like opening borders to international competition, it triggers a ruthless selection process. The weakest domestic factories die, and the highly efficient megacorporations scoop up their market share and become global titans.
So it's a theory about multinational corporate power.
Yes. But the brilliance of this study is that it proves this elite, Wall Street-level macroeconomic theory operates flawlessly in the dirt of the Canadian prairies.
Because killing the freight subsidy was basically a reverse trade shock.
Exactly. It massively increased the cost of trade, and the internal mechanism, the violent transfer of wealth from the slow to the fast, executed perfectly.
Which exposes this incredibly uncomfortable paradox about how we govern.
The efficiency paradox.
Yeah. Globally, governments bend over backwards to protect the quote-unquote small family farm. We love the aesthetic. We build massive subsidies to insulate them from global realities.
But the data here proves that protectionism is an industry straitjacket.
Because by artificially, subsidizing the logistics for a century, Canada was propping up thousands of subscale, inefficient operations.
They incentivized people to grow cheap stuff and delayed the adoption of revolutionary tech.
The subsidy held the ecosystem in stasis. Ripping the Band-Aid off caused immense localized human pain. We can't ignore the liquidated family farms.
No, the human cost was massive.
But macroeconomically, it completely cleared the runway for a world-class, hyper-modern, globally competitive agricultural boom.
The total wealth extracted from the region skyrocketed.
You really have to hold two totally conflicting truths in your head. It was a slaughterhouse for the independent guy, and it was the single most vital catalyst for long-term industry dominance.
And it was all triggered by changing the price of a train ticket. It just proves that logistics costs literally dictate who owns the earth and what physical technology exists.
Okay, so if we take these mechanics and apply them to the present day, it really forces you to look at the news differently.
Oh, absolutely. Look at what's happening globally right now.
We are seeing massive disruptions in shipping. Supply chains are fracturing. Geopolitical conflicts are rerouting cargo ships around the world.
Global freight rates are fluctuating wildly. It's the exact same dynamic as the crow rate, but on a planetary scale.
And the Canadian prairies prove that these macro-logistics shocks don't just raise retail prices. They trigger a 20-year structural purge.
They rewrite the rules of ownership.
I mean, let's look at an industry completely disconnected from dirt. Artificial intelligence.
Okay, interesting parallel.
Right now, in AI, we are seeing the exact same dynamic play out with compute costs. Training a foundation model requires thousands of insanely expensive NVIDIA GPUs.
Which is an astronomical fixed capital barrier.
It is the exact equivalent of the zero-till drill. A small tech startup cannot mathematically afford a $100 million compute cluster, just like the small farmer couldn't buy the cedar.
Wow, so you're saying we are in the 10-year illusion right now with AI.
Exactly. We see all these small devs building wrappers, creating this illusion of a diverse, democratized market, just like the prairie data in 2001.
But if the laws of capital reallocation hold true,
then those massive fixed costs are going to force a brutal consolidation. The tech giants who can spread that massive cost across billions of users will quietly absorb, outcompete, or start out the small guys.
the capital weapon will force the same reallocation.
It completely changes how you view the boring operational costs of any industry. Shipping fees, cloud compute, licensing. When baseline costs spike, the market doesn't just adapt, it purges.
So if you are looking at supply chain shocks today, the question isn't just when will prices normalize?
No, the question is, what massive 20-year corporate reshuffling is quietly beginning right now, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the 10-year illusion to fade? Take a hard look at the fixed capital requirements in your own sector, because the silent storm might already be blowing.